1332. The Yuan Dynasty is in turmoil. As the nation suffers from major financial struggles and regular natural disasters leading to famine and resentment against the authorities, it is without an emperor. A young prince will soon be selected to sit on the imperial throne. Although none suspect it, he is to be the last Yuan emperor. In 1332, the Yuan dynasty, which had gone through rapid succession crises, was under the regency of Empress Dowager Bochiri, the widow of the late Emperor Toghon Temür. However, true power was held by two military dictators. These were the Kipchak commander Temür and his accomplice Bayan of the Merkid tribe. The generals had gained power 4 years earlier by placing Toghon Temür on the throne as a puppet. Upon the emperor's death, although he could have been succeeded by his son Iltogz, the child had been put under the care of Temür, and his accession would reinforce the dictator's powers. Thus, the now regent Empress Dowager Bochiri enforced Toghon Temür's dying wish that his nephews should succeed him. Subsequently, the 6-year-old child Irinçinbalj was enthroned, despite Temür's objections. Irinçinbalj's short reign, however, lasted less than 2 months, as the child died prematurely. The question of succession was once more on the table. Jumping on the occasion, Commander Temür argued that his foster son Iltogz should be appointed to the throne. However, Bochiri was firm on respecting her late husband's wishes and argued that his other nephew, the teenage Toghon Temür, should assume the imperial leadership of the dynasty. Little did anyone realize he would be the Yuan's last emperor. There was, however, one small problem. 2 years prior, in April 1330, in the midst of political purges, Toghon Temür had been sent in exile on the remote Jeju Island, part of the vassal Korean Goryeo dynasty. In December 1331, he was moved yet again, this time to Jinjiang, modern-day Guilin, in a mountainous and secluded place, where he was reportedly tutored by a Buddhist monk and befriended a troop of monkeys. This period would likely be the most serene of his life. Back in the imperial court, Toghon Temür was finally officially selected to succeed child Emperor Irinçinbalj after several months of hindrance by Temür. As a compromise, the boy would marry one of Temür's daughters, and Iltogz was designated as the heir apparent. Toghon Temür's selection was also facilitated by the other dictator, Bayan of the Merkid, once the loyal right-hand man of Temür, who saw the opportunity of gaining influence by supporting Empress Dowager Bochiri's side. As messengers and an escort were dispatched south to collect the boy, a pivotal event occurred. In May 1333, Temür died at the age of 48, reportedly due to an unhealthy lifestyle. Although the dictator's shadow remained, as his entourage still held control of the imperial court, power dynamics in the Yuan's political system would undergo major changes. The Yuan dynasty would not remain much longer without a monarch. On the 19th of July 1333, Toghon Temür was brought to the Yuan dynasty's ceremonial capital of Shangdu, built by Kublai Khan, to be enthroned as emperor at the age of 13. He would be recorded as Emperor Huizong of Yuan or Emperor Shun, and Urhand Khan of the Mongol Empire. By October, Rangjung Dorje, the third Karmapa Lama, a prestigious Tibetan Buddhist master who had been invited by the late Emperor Toghon Temür years prior, arrived. The advisor would guide the young emperor in spiritual matters, in a continuation of his Buddhist education. Now that the emperor was well installed, it was time to find him a wife. Fulfilling the compromise for his selection, Toghon Temür was married to Temür's daughter, Danashri, who became empress of the dynasty. However, the monarch would also take a concubine who was to mark history. As part of the tributary system, the Korean kingdom of Goryeo had to send captured young girls as human tribute to the Yuan Dynasty. These unfortunate women were to be taken as servants and concubines by the nobility of the Yuan Dynasty. Toghon Temür caught an eye for one such seemingly insignificant palace maid. This woman was from the Korean Gi clan and would gradually gain great influence as the emperor deeply fell in love with her and would ultimately bear him his successor. In a great relief to the imperial court, the Yuan dynasty's throne had finally been stabilized, with a young emperor firmly installed and married. Thus, the imperial court relocated to the main capital, Khanbalik. However, Toghon Temür would suffer the same fate as his uncle and turn out to be a powerless puppet for most of his life. Although official power was now held by Empress Dowager Bochiri, time had come for her to share it. Indeed, as General Bayan of the Merkid had sided with her by aiding the new emperor's ascension, he was granted the position of Grand Chancellor, or Prime Minister of the Right, the highest executive position in the empire, which had been left vacant after Il Temur's death. As such, his influence skyrocketed, and within a few months came to outweigh that of late Il Temur himself. By 1335, he was designated as sole Grand Councillor, or Prime Minister. Now was his time to act. Shortly after his appointment, the power-hungry general organised a great purge of all possible rivals, including the entourage of late Il Temur, gaining full control of the court. These purges even reached the imperial couple. Empress Danashiri, daughter of Il Temur, was arrested for having reportedly aided her brothers who had rebelled against Bayan's powers. She was promptly banished and assassinated shortly after. Young Emperor Toghon Temür seemingly did not try to protect her. He had frequently clashed with his wife Danashiri in his blatant favoritism for his Korean concubine Lady Gi. Nonetheless, he was also terrified of Bayan and would remain so during the next few years. In a parallel to the tense circumstances of the imperial court, the situation of the Yuan dynasty was terrible. The treasury was in permanent deficit, generating constant financial crises. In addition, since the late 1320s, overwhelming natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, droughts, and locust invasions ravaged the nation. Despite meticulous and desperate relief efforts organized by the central and local authorities, hundreds of thousands died of starvation and disease, especially in the south. In the face of the situation, small local uprisings constantly broke out. For now, though, they were successfully curbed, but the Yuan dynasty would eventually lose control. Now that Bayan was in full control of state affairs, it came onto him to manage the crisis. For the Chancellor, the best course of action was to return to the old ways. Bayan planned to revert all the Yuan society back to how it functioned under its great founder Kublai Khan. As he had meddled with the administration of the empire for years, he knew its gears well. Tackling monetary issues first, Bayan ordered to cut down public spending, particularly on palace maintenance, which somewhat relieved the financial crisis. He then developed and optimized the relief programs for disaster-stricken regions prone to famine. However, his other measures, which would define his rule, would prove not so benevolent. One specific policy of the early Yuan dynasty particularly appealed to Bayan: the ethnic segregation system of its origins, which had dwindled through the decades. Indeed, many Han Chinese people had embraced Mongolian culture by learning the language and taking Mongol names. Likewise, many Mongols adopted Chinese culture, and interethnic marriage was strong. For example, the graduation list of the Imperial Civil Servant examinations of the year 1333 reveals that among Mongols and Somu candidates, more than half had Chinese mothers, and 2/3 of those married had a Chinese wife. This kind of mingling outraged the Chancellor, aiming to reaffirm the Mongol domination of the Yuan Dynasty, Bayan made it illegal for any Han Chinese to own either weapons or horses. It was also made illegal for the Han Chinese to learn Mongolian or any other language of the empire. Additionally, he severely restricted their access to any significant administrative position. Before long, both the general population and the Han Chinese elites grew spiteful against the Yuan authorities. But Bayan did not stop there. The imperial examinations, a Confucian civil servant examination system, were completely banned. This measure caused great opposition, as it did not only affect the Han Chinese, but also aspiring Semu and Mongol youths who had no internal connections to climb the social ladder. However, no one dared publicly criticize the dictator, as Bayan employed more and more radical ways to strengthen his position. In 1338, he ordered the public execution of Toghto, an influent and popular royal prince controlling troops in Mongolia. Although he was effectively consolidating his power in the short term, opposition to Bayan secretly crystallized everywhere. By the late 1330s, the Yuan authorities began to lose control of the population. Deprived of most rights, the Han Chinese frustration and desperation turned to resistance. This came in three forms. The few elites, many of whom were small regional officials, began to blatantly ignore central orders, acting independently. Many desperate youths, famished and destitute, turned to banditry, ransacking villages or even small towns. Finally, more organized social movements and secret societies emerged. One of them had already brought trouble to the Yuan dynasty, the White Lotus sect. This Buddhist-inspired revolutionary movement, officially banned for having organized uprisings in the past, had grown more radical and resolved than ever. From it would emerge the doom of the Yuan. In 1338, one of its followers, a Buddhist monk named Peng Yingyu, led his disciple Zhou Wang to lead an uprising in Yuanzhou, commanding 5,000 followers. Although the dynasty's forces were able to crush the rebellion and execute Zhou Wang, Peng Yingyu managed to escape the Yuan's grasp. After fleeing to the north, he settled in the western Huai River Valley, where he continued to preach the rebellious White Lotus teachings, planting the seeds of what would become the Red Turban Rebellion. The peasantry was not the only one to revolt. Late in 1339, in Bianliang, modern-day Kaifeng, the provincial capital of Henan province, a Han Chinese official named Fan Meng schemed his own uprising. Stuck in the lower Yuan hierarchy, with a meagre and constantly delayed salary, Fan Meng federated other outraged local clerks and planned the meticulous assassination of many high-ranking local officials. With the stage set, Fan Meng unleashed his rebellion, swiftly taking hold of Bianliang. Although his uprising was rapidly crushed, the recent revolt, increasing in frequency and magnitude, illuminated a disquieting truth. The Yuan dynasty's grip on power was slipping. Popular revolts would however not cause the doom of Chancellor Bayan. His enemy would come from within. In March 1340, Bayan experienced a sudden and dramatic turn of events. To the surprise of the whole imperial court, the Chancellor was suddenly stripped of all his positions and banished from the capital to the south in a meticulous coup. His life would end abruptly only a month later, due to either illness or assassination. The plot had been orchestrated by none other than Bayan's own nephew, the youthful Toghto. Barely 26 years old, Toghto had grown profoundly uneasy over Bayan's radical policies and violent dictatorship, and the dark legacy they would leave for their clan. Endowed with a profound understanding of both Chinese and Mongol customs, acquired through tutelage under a Han Chinese Confucian scholar, and a decade of service in the prestigious Koshig, the Mongol Imperial Guard, Toghto now stood at the helm, As he assumed the position of Grand Chancellor of the Right, he could now enact his ardent desire to save the crumbling Yuan dynasty. Toghto's initial tenure as Chancellor witnessed the emergence of an up to now powerless figure, Emperor Toghon Temür. Still in the shadows, the now 19-year-old emperor had supported the coup after spending years in terror of the dictator. The Yuan monarch then posthumously denounced his uncle, the late Emperor Toghon Temür, and banished his aunt, the Empress Dowager Botsiri, as well as his cousin Iltogz, the heir apparent, who were both assassinated shortly after. Power was subsequently re-centralized around Toghto, supported by the emperor. It seemed that Toghon Temür's courage was finally blossoming, perhaps fueled by the birth of his son named Ayusridar to his beloved Korean concubine, Lady Gi. For having given the monarch a potential heir, she was promoted from a simple concubine to the emperor's secondary consort. This decision, however, faced considerable disapproval from members of the nobility, given her background. But Lady Gi was not close to the throne yet, as the position of empress, left empty since Danashiri's arrest, had already been occupied 3 years prior by the distinguished figure of Bayan, who would lead a discreet and dignified life as the emperor's primary wife. In full command, Toghto was determined to revive the wavering Yuan dynasty. Bayan's authoritarian policies were immediately scrapped, as the talented Han Chinese literati were invited back to high-ranking administrative positions, and the Chinese meritocracy restored through the revival of the imperial examinations. In the Chancellor's view, the empire's survival depended on a strong re-centralization, as he saw regionalism as a gateway to fragmentation. Toghto's visionary spirit extended beyond administrative reforms, as his endeavours would also involve cultural works. In 1343, under his guidance, a remarkable undertaking began: the compilation of the 3 histories. This formidable work aimed to capture and preserve the official history of the Liao, Jin and Song dynasties to safeguard China's legacy and present the Yuan as a legitimate successor to these regimes. The 3 histories were compiled in only 2 years and published in 1345. Interestingly, during this period, China would receive an envoy from the Pope in Avignon, who was to be the last Christian missionary to set foot in China for more than 2 centuries. This was Giovanni de Marignolli. Half a century before, the pioneer of Catholicism in China and first Archbishop of Khanbalik, Giovanni de Montecorvino, had arrived. With great zeal, he established churches and successfully converted thousands of Mongols, Chinese, and others to the Christian faith. Upon his passing in 1328, the local Christian community sent a request to the papacy in Europe, urging the dispatch of a successor to carry on the religious work. This provided a unique opportunity for the Yuan imperial court to cultivate connections with the Western world, leading to the departure of an embassy in 1336. And so, 6 years later, Giovanni de Marignolli arrived. His accounts vividly described the lavish patronage offered by the imperial court to Catholic missions. However, the missionary would not settle permanently in Khanbalik like his predecessors. After 3 years of stay, Giovanni requested to leave, and the emperor reportedly granted him and his party generous gifts to cover travelling expenses for their return trip. Meanwhile, the governance of the crumbling Yuan dynasty faced yet another crisis. Despite his great efforts and best intentions, the young Toghto found himself overwhelmed by the desperate situation and mounting pressure of his responsibilities. Throughout China, Han Chinese uprisings kept erupting, challenging the increasingly strained authority of the Yuan regime, which struggled more and more to pacify them. Eventually, in June 1344, Toghto resigned from his position after 4 tiring years. Around the same time, torrential rains led to an overwhelming swelling of the Yellow River, which broke its dikes. Consequently, nearby agricultural lands and urban areas were completely flooded, resulting in significant loss of life and exacerbating the already prevailing poverty. In addition, the floods inflated the Grand Canal, disrupting vital transportation of grain, which worsened famines and even threatened the metropolitan region itself with food shortages. Because of the immense financial difficulties and other pressing matters, the Yuan authorities could not afford to repair the infrastructure, which would remain dilapidated for the years to come. Nature's wrath seemed to mimic the mounting chaos, as other natural disasters kept plaguing the land one after the other, worsening epidemics and skyrocketing the population's resentment. However, the Yuan dynasty was not alone in its struggles. Across the whole Mongol Empire, each of its fragments faced its own ordeals. The Chagatai Khanate, once united, split into two distinct entities, the Western Chagatai Khanate and Mongolistan, both harassed by infighting. The Golden Horde, known for its control over Slavic states, lost command over its vassals. The Ilkhanate, once a formidable power ranging from Anatolia to the Himalayas, succumbed entirely to rebellions, invasions, and the devastating effects of plague. After Toghto stepped down from power, several different administrations succeeded each other under the overall leadership of one Barka Bukha. Unlike his predecessors, Barka Bukha believed that decentralization held the key to resolving the dynasty's challenges. In his view, granting more autonomy to local authorities would offer better solutions to the social, economic and military issues that the empire was facing. One interesting measure was the dispatching of 12 pairs of officials in 1345, with each pair consisting of one Han Chinese and one non-Chinese investigator, tasked with addressing local concerns across the nation. However, despite this innovative approach, the impact of Barka Bukha's decentralization efforts proved to be modest at best. The challenges faced by the dynasty persisted, and the desired outcomes seemed elusive. 1345 would also mark the arrival of another foreign explorer to China, Ibn Battuta. This Berber Muslim scholar, credited as the greatest explorer in world history before the age of exploration, had already travelled extensively across the Maghreb region, throughout the Middle East and as far as the Swahili coast in Eastern Africa, eventually making his way to the Indian Delhi Sultanate. During his time there, Ibn Battuta was bestowed with a significant task, leading an embassy to the Yuan dynasty. In 1345, he arrived in the bustling port city of Quanzhou, where he marvelled at the vibrant Muslim trading community that had thrived there for centuries, providing a detailed account of it. According to Ibn Battuta's travel records, he then travelled to Guangzhou, where he described the bustling markets of the southern city, including the exquisite blue and white Chinese porcelain, a product which had undergone great innovations under the Yuan dynasty. Ibn Battuta then claimed to have gone to Hangzhou, from which he made his way to Khanbalik, the capital of the Yuan dynasty, seemingly on the Grand Canal. However, scholars debate the accuracy of Ibn Battuta's account of his northern journey to Khanbalik, which is likely a fabrication. Indeed, his descriptions suddenly become vague, and the travel times between destinations appear dubiously short. Moreover, traversing the flooded Grand Canal and navigating through the rebellious Huai River Valley region would have undoubtedly presented significant challenges, making such a journey noteworthy. In any case, Ibn Battuta returned to the west in 1346, becoming the last significant foreigner to explore China for centuries. In the nation, rebellions kept worsening. In 1348, Jurchen clans broke free from Yuan domination after 5 years of strife, as rebellion was brewing in Tibet. By 1349, as the situation only got worse, desperate 29-year-old Toghon Temür implored Toghto to reclaim his former position as Chancellor of the Right. Remarkably, Toghto accepted the plea and agreed to resume his role, stepping back into the turbulent landscape of Yuan politics. With his ambition intact and a newfound courage, Toghto would prove capable of tackling the daunting issues at hand. The devastating financial crisis demanded primary attention and immediate action. As a temporary measure, a new issue of paper currency was printed in late 1350, allowing for much-needed financing. Thus, Toghto embarked on his grand project, the subjugation of the mighty Yellow River, which dikes had been left unrepaired since 1344. Toghto envisioned redirecting its powerful currents towards the coast south of the Shandong Peninsula, a massive undertaking that would involve over 100 kilometers of extensive digging and dike construction. Despite facing widespread skepticism and lacking substantial support, Toghto officially launched his project in May 1351. He mobilized approximately 150,000 civilians from the region and enlisted the aid of 20,000 troops under the watchful supervision of the Chinese official Jia Lu. In an astonishing feat, the great infrastructure project was efficiently carried out and completed by December. Nonetheless, the meager pay and extremely harsh conditions imposed on the workers for the project sprouted great resentment in them. Within this atmosphere of frustration and grievances, agitators found fertile soil to sow the seeds of rebellion. Rebel leader Han Shantong, raised in the White Lotus rebellious doctrines of Pang Yingyu, successfully rallied thousands of workers with mystic promises of vengeance and a better future, and planned an uprising in Yingzhou. The year 1351 can be seen as a turning point, as the sporadic and localized uprisings of the past began to evolve into larger and more organized movements. The once isolated revolts now took on a continuous and widespread nature. In addition to the organized revolutionary movements, disloyal officials began asserting their autonomy, disregarding imperial directives, as troops of bandits continued to roam the nation, pillaging as they pleased, further contributing to the prevailing chaos. Red Turban leader Han Shantong's uprising initially failed, as the local authorities successfully quelled the movement, captured the man and executed him in 1351. However, the revolution had begun. His teenage son, Han Linar, became the Red Turban's figurehead and successfully escaped the Yuan's grasp and continued the struggle, as other rebel leaders would capture Yingzhou shortly after and begin conquering nearby areas. Throughout the region, rebellious men flocked to them and swelled the ranks of the Red Turbans. Amidst these unstable times, another prominent figure emerged, Chaghan Temür. This Mongol commander, based around Shenqiu district in Henan province, grew increasingly concerned with the growing presence of the Red Turban rebels. Recognizing the imminent threat to his domains, Chaghan Temür took matters into his own hands and raised personal troops to safeguard his territories, driving out the rebels. For this, the Yuan imperial court rewarded him and encouraged him to strengthen his armies to defend the region. By now, the Yuan dynasty's forces were decadent, mismanaged, and small in numbers, only a shadow of the mighty seasoned troops of Kublai's times. However, the resilient and resolute chancellor, Toghto, refused to succumb to despair. His efforts would now turn to address the urgent need for military reform and set about restoring the strength of the empire's defences. For this, Toghto both raised additional regular troops to bolster the ranks of the weakened forces and recruited local Han Chinese militias who possessed intimate knowledge of their respective regions. In addition, he understood the inherent dangers of granting absolute autonomy to military commanders, as it risked triggering defiant behaviour or even rebellion. To prevent this, the Chancellor shrewdly implemented a system of constant troop rotation, frequently exchanging forces between commanders, shuffling troops from one region to another, and disbanding armies in one area while raising new ones elsewhere. This strategic maneuvering ensured that no single commander could amass enough power to challenge the imperial authority. Through these calculated measures, Toghto successfully regained control over the dire military situation that had threatened the dynasty. Empowered by these efficient reforms, the champion of the Yuan dynasty personally led a successful expedition to retake Suzhou in 1352, restoring Yuan authority in the region. However, the chancellor's attention would soon be drawn to yet another pressing problem. The discontinued shipments of grain from the south to the metropolitan area, plagued by piracy and banditry, put the capital and its surroundings at risk of severe shortages and famine. Thus, the unfazed Toghto devised a comprehensive plan in 1353 to overhaul the traditional agricultural system of China. For this, the Chancellor organized state farms in the metropolitan region, recruiting manpower from the Shandong Peninsula and approximately 2,000 skilled rice farmers from the southern regions to serve as advisors in the art of rice cultivation. Toghto was seemingly the right man in the right place during this critical period. Fate would however not see him complete his mission of restoring order in the Yuan dynasty. In 1354, Toghto departed to besiege Gaoyou, the base of a salt smuggler turned rebel leader, Zhang Shicheng. Zhang had declared the independence of the Dazhou state, which was emerging as the most prosperous of the rebel states, as it strategically controlled key cities on the Grand Canal. Toghto commenced a siege that seemed poised to crush the rebellion. However, the tide of events took an unexpected turn when an imperial decree arrived at the local Yuan headquarters. Emperor Toghon Temür, in a momentous decision, stripped Toghto of all his positions and sentenced him to banishment. This single action would prove to be a critical blow to the Yuan dynasty. True to his unwavering loyalty to the dynasty, Toghto complied with the order, relinquishing his titles and embarking on a path of exile in the distant Yunnan province. Immediately after his departure, a significant portion of the Yuan forces deserted or even defected to join the ranks of the rebels, allowing Zhang Shicheng to break the siege and force the Yuan troops into a retreat. But why did Toghon Temür act in this seemingly irrational way? It is likely that the emperor, who had suffered the oppression of Bayan as a child, grew distrustful of Toghto, who had amassed just as much power as his late uncle. In addition, personal resentment may have played a role, as Toghto aimed to entirely prevent the emperor's designation of his eldest son, Ayushridar, as the heir apparent, possibly since the prince was seen as illegitimate, his mother being a Korean concubine. Furthermore, Toghto's disgrace was facilitated by many officials in the imperial court who disapproved of his governing style, which emphasized tight control and centralization. With the chancellor removed from the political landscape, Ayushridar was formally invested as the heir apparent in a grand ceremony around April 1355. However, the loss of Toghto's strategic leadership and expertise would prove to be a fatal blow, sentencing the Yuan dynasty to death. One of Toghto's pivotal reforms was the military reorganization of constant troop rotation to avoid military fragmentation. Without the chancellor, the empire gradually fell into the hands of various factions, including Yuan generals with questionable allegiance to the imperial court, bandit leaders, and organized rebel groups such as the Red Turbans. As a result, the control of the imperial court was effectively limited to the metropolitan region and Mongolia. However, the rebels were certainly not united against the Yuan, and their infighting delayed the dynasty's inevitable collapse. Around 1353 and 1354, a devastating wave of epidemics swept through the regions of Shanxi and Huguang, resulting in a significant loss of life. Approximately 2/3 of the population in these areas perished, leaving them severely depopulated. In addition, the once mighty Yuan dynasty lost control of its vassals. Its presence in Tibet was overthrown as the plateau regained independence in 1354. 2 years later, the Goryeo dynasty, under the fresh leadership of King Gongmin, drove out the Mongols and regained full independence in 1356. In parallel, in a desperate attempt to address the financial crisis, the emperor resorted to printing an excessive amount of paper money, which resulted in rampant inflation. By 1356, the value of the banknotes had plummeted, rendering them completely worthless. In addition to the Red Turban Rebellion and bandit kingdoms, the Yuan would also have to face the Ipsah Rebellion, which broke out in 1357. This new uprising was launched by Muslim, Arab and Persian Samu, who had settled in Jiangzhou province and rose up in the face of economic difficulties and religious tensions. After toppling the weak local Yuan forces, the Ipsah rebels successfully took control of Quanzhou and began expanding their territorial control. Meanwhile, in Khanbalik, only a small fraction of officials still argued that centralization was the only way to save the state. The majority of the imperial court now advocated the exact opposite, to officially regionalize the Yuan dynasty by recognizing some of the warlords' authorities in exchange for their obedience. Some bandit kings, such as Zhang Shichang and Fang Guozhan, agreed to the deal, although their allegiance was weak and virtually in name only. To the image of its crumbling authority, infighting broke out between two Yuan dynasty commanders. These were Chaghan Temür, the general who had raised troops to defend his region in Henan, and Temür, an influent Mongol noble, son of a Yuan general who now commanded his forces and controlled territory to the west of the capital. Both vied to extend their territory. Chaghan Temür, acting independently from the imperial court, focused his efforts to maintain his influence and suppress rebels. Alongside his childhood friend Li Siqi, the commanders moved to Shanxi province to consolidate their power, turning their militia forces into seasoned troops and clearing the southern Shanxi region from Red Turban rebels. Following this victory, Chaghan Temür turned his attention back to his homeland in Henan province, where the rebels were in full expansion. Some rebel forces were even dispatched for a northern expedition and were able to capture and burn down the Shangdu imperial palace. For now, however, they were unready to assault Khanbalik and were chased east by Temür, who now positioned himself as a protector of the metropolitan region and established his headquarters in Datong. Settling in the Liaodong Peninsula, the Red Turbans would launch an invasion of Korea which would turn out unsuccessful. In parallel, Chaghan Temür was ready to reclaim his hometown and former territories and crossed the strategic Tong mountain pass with his army. In his unstoppable counteroffensive, the Mongol general achieved a symbolic victory over the Red Turbans by capturing their capital of Bianliang on the 10th of September 1359, thus driving out their figurehead Han Lin-er and his generals. This city had once been the capital of the Song dynasty, from which Han Lin-er and the whole rebel movement claimed succession. Chaghan Temür made it his new headquarters, and then turned his forces to the Shandong Peninsula to sweep that region from rebels as well and expand his influence. Crushing the Red Turbans wherever he went, the Mongol general was seemingly on the road to reunite the whole North China plain. However, his reconquest was suddenly cut short as he was assassinated in obscure circumstances during a siege around June 1362 by two turncoat commanders who then joined the rebels. Nonetheless, the campaign would not stop there. With the approval of the imperial court, Chaghan Temür's armies and territories were inherited by his nephew, Kokë Temür, known in Chinese as Wang Baobao. Undeterred, the skillful young general pursued the work of his uncle and was able to crush all rebel presence in Shandong province, avenging Chaghan, achieving military success and gaining recognition at the imperial court. Nonetheless, in addition to his forces and land, Kokë Temür had also inherited his uncle's strife against Temür, still stationed in Datong as the protector of the capital. Their rivalry eventually turned to open fighting, but Kokë was soon able to gain the upper hand in the conflict. Through intervention from the imperial court, the infighting was however put to an end. But this was only a temporary peace, as factionalism on this issue developed even within the imperial court. Indeed, the now 24-year-old Crown Prince Ayushridra resented by Temür, who saw him as illegitimate as the son of a Korean concubine, plotted against the latter and aligned himself with Chaghan Temür, encouraging him to crush his enemy. Thus, Kokë moved to Taiyuan to prepare a campaign, but around March 1364, Temür strategically rushed his forces to Khanbalik to pressure the imperial court. Faced with mounting threats and concern for his safety, the crown prince decided to escape the capital, seeking asylum under Kokë Temür in Taiyuan. Aligning himself with influential court officials who shared his ideas, Temür aimed to replace Ayushridra by a more legitimate heir, namely the son of Empress Bayan. For the time being though, he merely executed supporters of the crown prince and returned to his headquarters. Weakened but not defeated, Ayushridra promptly returned to the capital and resumed his plan against Temür, ordering Kokë to crush him. A three-pronged attack was devised, but Temür avoided engaging in battle and marched once more on Khanbalik, where he arrived in July, forcing the crown prince to flee once more. This time, through intimidation or persuasion, Temür convinced the emperor to recognize his authority and even appoint him Grand Chancellor of the Left, then Grand Chancellor of the Right the following month. During this period, Temür strived to remove Ayushridra as crown prince and drove his mother Lady Gi out of the palace. However, Temür's reign of terror would only last for a few months. By April 1365, Kokë Temür successfully captured his headquarters in Toghon. Subsequently, whether disillusioned by him or seizing the opportunity of his loss of power, Toghon Temür ended up ordering his assassination in July 1365 and offered his severed head in a box to Ayushridra. Reassured, the crown prince could finally return to the capital under the powerful escort of Kokë Temür. Incidentally, Empress Bayan died shortly after these events, allowing Toghon Temür, still infatuated with his Korean secondary consort and mother to his successor, to finally make her the official empress of the Yuan Dynasty in December 1365, concluding her formidable social ascension from a near slave to a monarch. The emperor also expressed deep satisfaction with Kokë Temür's role in safeguarding his son and heir, commending his efforts and awarding him additional titles. However, the general refused to support Empress Gi and Crown Prince Ayushridra in their plan to intimidate Toghon Temür into abdication in favour of his son, generating great and durable resentment from their part. The general became the Yuan dynasty's new champion and returned to Bianliang with the daunting task of sweeping the Yangtze region of rebel forces. However, Kokë Temür's newfound influence and authority was not well received by all. The warlords to his west, controlling Shanxi province, recognized neither the general's authority nor even his legitimacy as Chaghan Temür's successor. They were spearheaded by Li Siqi, the childhood friend of Chaghan Temür, who had like him raised his own forces to fight rebels and emerged as the dominant local force, as well as Zhang Liangbi, Torbeh and Kong Xing, supporters of the late Temür. With their refusal to comply with his orders to mobilize troops against the Red Turban rebels, tensions escalated rapidly. As the rift deepened, the warlords formed an alliance against Kokë Temür, plunging the Yuan dynasty into another period of internal strife. In this turn of events, Kokë Temür deliberately chose not to lead his army southward to confront the Red Turban rebels. Instead, he prioritized dealing with his rivals in the west. Further south, the Muslim Ipsah rebellion was finally brought to an end after 9 years of struggle. The commander responsible for its pacification was Chen Youding, a skilled Han Chinese Yuan general whose talents earned him the reputation as a pillar of the dynasty in the south of the empire. His victory brought temporary respite to the Yuan dynasty, but it proved to be merely a delay in the face of impending collapse. The general infighting between Kokë Temür and the allied warlords gave the opportunity to one ambitious red turban leader named Zhu Yuanzhang to defeat his rivals and establish himself as the sole leader. In turn, his force became the dominant power in the nation, allowing the red turbans to conquer or incorporate other leaders such as Zhang Shichang and Fang Guozhen in 1367. In the face of Kokë Temür's unwillingness to dedicate his efforts to suppress Zhu Yuanzhang, the emperor ended up stripping him of all his titles and ordered other generals to crush him. Despite these measures, Kokë Temür was still in full control of his powerful forces, and the weakened Yuan imperial court lacked the strength to enforce any significant change. Although acting independently from central authority, the general never announced his allegiance to the dynasty. In November 1367, after having united the south, Zhu Yuanzhang, based in his capital of Nanjing, made a decisive move by directing his forces to launch an offensive in the northern territories. The rebels' talented generals outmatched the dynasty's forces. The city of Jinan fell on the 28th of December, and by March of the following year, the whole Shandong Peninsula was lost to the Red Turbans. Their unshakable advance continued as they conquered Bianyang on April 16th, driving away Kokë Temür, and eventually securing their conquest by capturing the strategic Tong Mountain Pass on the 13th of May. The rebel war machine was unstoppable, taking city after city, region after region. Alongside these military triumphs, as Zhu Yuanzhang seemed to have the support of fate itself, the rebel leader marked history forever. On the 23rd of January 1368, he formally claimed the mandate of heaven, positioning himself as the rightful heir to the throne of China. Zhu Yuanzhang then officially declared the establishment of the Great Ming Dynasty, and adopting for his new imperial era the name of Hongwu, literally vastly martial. In a both symbolic and strategic move, the Ming forces, led by General Xu Da, then marched on Han Balik. With no defences left, Toghon Temür and the imperial court had no choice but to abandon it and seek refuge in Shangdu. In a last-ditch effort, the desperate emperor officially reinstated Kokë Temür to his previous titles and implored him to halt the Ming invasion. But his actions were too little too late. Han Balik fell to the Ming on the 20th of September, who promptly renamed the city Beiping, pacified north. Although Yuan loyalists still maintained control over Shanxi and Yunnan provinces, and Mongolia was still under the authority of the imperial court, the fall of the primary capital marked the end of the Yuan dynasty. The Hongwu emperor took decisive action by deploying his generals to confront Kokë Temür and the warlords in Shanxi, while simultaneously pursuing the fleeing Yuan court. In 1369, the Ming forces pressed forward, venturing deeper into northern territories. Their advance compelled the Yuan imperial court to retreat to Yingchang as Shangdu fell to the enemy and was razed to the ground on the 20th of July, its once majestic structures reduced to sparse remnants of stone. Kokë Temür and the Shanxi warlords did not fare better than the court, finding themselves pushed back, unable to withstand the advancing might of the Ming forces. In Yingchang, after decades of turmoil, years of chaos and months of flight, on the 23rd of May 1370, Toghon Temür died at the age of 49, 2 days from his 50th birthday. With his passing, the Yuan dynasty was over. Spanning nearly a century, the Yuan dynasty was a pivotal yet overlooked chapter of the history of China. Although subsequent rulers of the dynasty could not match the exceptional abilities of its founder, Kublai Khan, it witnessed remarkable advancements in various fields. Gunpowder, a transformative invention, was developed during this era, and notable scientific progress was achieved in mathematics and astronomy. The Yuan dynasty also witnessed cultural achievements in the realms of painting and theatre, as well as crafts such as porcelain. By early 1370, although remnants of the Yuan dynasty, now known as the Northern Yuan, still held control over Yunnan and Mongolia, the Ming dynasty was firmly established as a new empire in China. For the first time in nearly half a millennium, the nation stood on the precipice of reuniting under the banner of a single mighty Han Chinese dynasty. Zhu Yuanzhang was building a legacy that would last 300 years. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or requests, feel free to leave them in the comment section below.